everyone, this is Chelsea here at ApplyBoard, and today I'm with a very special guest named Caleb. His handle is How to Go Abroad if you want to check him out on Twitter and Instagram. And today he's going to give us some advice for handling language barriers in countries where you're not the native speaker. So he has lots of experience. He's lived in 10 different countries and is currently living in Prague. Caleb, you're originally from Northern California.
That's right.
So I guess we've spoken on this before, but there's so many barriers when it comes to coming to a new country, and there's this level of this cultural unspokenness that maybe a foreigner doesn't know first off the bat, but most of our students that follow us already have that first level of they've taken an IELTS test to get into a Canadian university or college, and now they're kind of exploring what it means to live in Canada. So one of the things I wrote down was just Canadian slang, or if you were living in the US, what that kind of means. I feel like a lot of times when native speakers speak to each other, it's almost a relaxed version of proper English. And then kind of the body language that comes along with that. Like you said, the jokes, the different facial expressions, these unwritten cultural norms that come along with language. It's not even just the words, it's kind of how you are with people. So you have a very good point for students of something they can do at their school to kind of become a little bit more involved.
Right, yeah. So that's a lot of different barriers kind of bundled together, and I think it's useful for students to think about several different categories of tips for learning the language and improving more efficiently and quicker. And I think we could do a separate video about that, because there's a lot to say about that. And I've had lots of experience failing to learn languages. So I can definitely say what wasted my time and what did not work well for me, and a few things that did work well. But then there's also the cultural element that's not necessarily about language, because you have Americans who go to the UK, and even if they can communicate almost 100%, culturally there's still a huge barrier when it comes to making friends, how you behave with people, what's correct behavior. Now, and all of those are kind of separate from a language barrier, which is not necessarily about improving quickly or more efficiently, but just getting over that communication hurdle in the moment. So moving straight to people who are in the position of your audience, that they can communicate, they have a kind of pre or intermediate level of English, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be easy to communicate when you get to the country. And all of you watching, if you've kind of been surprised by how much you struggle with the language, even though you've been studying for years and years, and at home you're the best in your class at English, and you expected to immediately have friends and find it to be really easy, it's hard for everyone. It's not just you didn't fail to learn English. This is completely normal, because, like Chelsea, as you said, the native speaker form of the language is something completely different than what's usually taught in schools, or even what you see in the movies. It becomes a much more organic and difficult form of the language, that native speakers leave out everything they don't need to express their purpose. Very often in English, we leave out the subject, in fact. You hear people say, go into the store.
Yeah.
Who's going to the store? It's only because of the context, and for a non-native speaker, and this happens in every single language. What you hear on the street is completely different than what you've learned. So when it comes to trying to make connections, I think one of the most important things that you can do right from the beginning when you're at your university is look for a club that shares your interest. It could be sports, it could be art, it could be board games, it could be movies, anything. Most Canadian universities have tons of student clubs. And they love to have new members. All they want is someone who shares their interests. And there, your language limitations will matter less.
Right.
And I find this to be even more useful than like a tandem, because a tandem is like one-on-one. The pressure is on learning the language. But in activity, you have a purpose. Like you want to get over the language barrier just to achieve that purpose, and then people start to understand what you can and cannot communicate about. You quickly become friends over your common interests, not limited by your language, and it goes forward like this. So that's a really great way to start. Another way to make sure that you maintain confidence, because that's I think the most important thing. Like it's a very difficult situation. I've lived abroad for most of my adult life, for the last 15 years. I still find it very embarrassing to try to communicate in a language if I'm not comfortable in it. Chelsea, do you have any experience like that you like really found it embarrassing to even try to communicate in a language?
Absolutely. I've definitely been in the situation where I thought I knew a little bit more of a language than I did, and I kind of almost thought I would be able to pull out keywords or be able to rely on body language, and I felt really frustrated actually because it wasn't that easy. And I even found that the way that certain people speak together is not what I was used to. Just the way that the inflection in their voice, I couldn't even tell you when they were making a joke half the time, because the way that they speak is so different than what I was brought up on. So absolutely, I mean, I've told you this, I experienced that in the heart of Mexico before, and this was coming from a foreigner who thought that maybe Spanish was a little bit closer to French than it actually is.
Turns out it's a different language.
Turns out. And even just knowing a little bit of Spanish. So actually, you came up with a really good icebreaker for telling someone you don't speak the language.
Well, if you're in that position and you're really struggling to communicate at all, what I like to do every time I go to a new country, even as a tourist, I learn the phrase, "Do you speak English?" in the language of that country.
Right.
Now, some people say that's kind of silly because you just go and say, "Hey, do you speak English?" And if they respond, well, then they understood you and you're okay. But I always find it really embarrassing to start in my own language when I'm in their country.
Yeah.
So if I communicate with them at least that one phrase, they understand what I'm asking, they know where I'm coming from. And if the response is, no or whatever, clearly they don't speak any English, then at least they know that I'm a foreigner, I don't speak their language, and then I'm free to, pantomime or point at the map or do whatever is necessary to communicate. But we're on the same page at that point, so that has broken the ice. Now, if you're an intermediate speaker, another way to kind of break a similar ice is remember the phrase, "I'm sorry, English isn't my first language. Could you slow down a little bit? Could you repeat that? Could you, I don't know this word. Could you explain that a different way?" And I find it's amazing to me psychologically how hard it is to admit that we're not native speakers. Like the instinct is to try to smile and nod and pretend like we're native speakers when of course we're not. Like we don't, I usually don't have a clue what's going on. But my first reaction is, okay, just like pretend that you understand what's happening, like act natural, which is pointless. Like that doesn't help anyone. And 99% of the time, if you tell someone, like, especially the phrase, "Oh, sorry, it's not my first language," then you're also expressing, like, remember, I'm making an effort to communicate in your language. Work with me here, like meet me in the middle. And sometimes people won't change the way they're saying it at all. There are people who just don't slow down or don't use different words, but it means then you've hit a language barrier. You're not going to be able to communicate easily with those people at this point. Other people will slow down. They'll realize that they should speak differently. And this is a really useful thing. Don't pretend to be fluent if you're not. It doesn't help anyone. And just try to be very honest about what you can and can't do. And if you're at the level where you're missing like one or two words, ask about those words. Then you get to learn those new words.
Yeah. And I think too, you brought up something before about how you could be the top of your class as an English speaker in another country coming to Canada or the US, or any other major English-speaking country. And I think something that's important, and I feel like this would be a big challenge for me, is just kind of understanding and accepting that this is part of the process,
right.
and that it is a learning experience. And just because you're learning something doesn't mean that you won't be proficient or you are dumb.
Right. So this then gets to like going a little bit into a different topic of learning the language.
Yeah.
But as you said, it is important to remember that each experience with the language, even if it's uncomfortable or difficult, it is a learning experience.
Yeah.
I think an important thing is to approach it as a learning experience, because honestly, learning a language is the process of making every possible mistake at least once.
Yeah.
So,
in a different part of your brain that you're trying to almost... Because now I've heard that some people will, even when English is their second language, they'll think in their native language and then they have to speak in... They have to translate for themselves or their brain. So yeah, I think... Yeah. So you have... you've given us tips on like going and joining a club, which is a great idea for kind of having a purpose to bring you all together, like almost like a forced community where you have a natural excuse to be around other people.
It's not about being there because of the language or because you're supposed to practice. Now, still, tandems and language classes are very important and useful, but language is all about achieving a purpose. So if you're in an environment where whatever your limitations of the language, you have to achieve this purpose aside from your limited English, that's going to make a much more organic learning experience and make it much better to just have friends. Even if you never improve in your language, it means you're actually going to have friends who share an interest, and that's a really important thing.
So how long have you been living in Prague?
This time around, 1.5 years, but I lived here for 4 years before, and most of the last 15 years I've lived in foreign countries. So Prague is a very difficult place for the language, but then I've also lived in places where as soon as people see me, they know that I'm not a native speaker, like Japan or India.
Yeah.
It's almost easier because you don't need that icebreaker. As soon as you show up, you're like, oh, this person does not speak my language.
Yes.
And you can start on that page. But every situation has a slightly different type of language barrier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so how often do you think that you use, I don't know if you use like a Google Translate?
Well, like if I'm dealing with emails at work, pretty like on a daily basis, maybe not every hour, but a daily basis. Czech, I've gotten to the point where I can sit in meetings and understand what's going on and sometimes like give my input in Czech, but it's still pretty rough. But this is something also of like we should never hesitate to use all the tools available to us.
Yeah.
And especially for kind of beginner, pre-intermediate level, like if you've broken the ice and you've started a conversation with someone, but it's kind of breaking down, like why not like pull out your phone with the translation app and speak into it and have it speak to them? It's not ideal. It's better for you to perfect your English and be able to have a real conversation, of course, but like it's all about communicating with people. Mm-hmm. I also find like props are really, really useful for that kind of thing. Like have pictures of your family or your home country that you can show people. Have kind of a set thing that you want to tell people about where you're from and why you're in Canada. And after you practice it a few times, it'll sound like this perfect, like this, not a speech, but like you'll have a perfect introduction to who you are and why you're there and what you're interested in. And then this makes it easier to kind of fit that into conversation.
So I would like to ask you then, what are some very common mistakes that international students could be making when coming to a new country, let alone a new school?
Like in terms of communication and language barriers and things. I mean, most of the things that I've said so far is about trying to make the environment easier to understand. So asking people to speak slower, like asking something I didn't say, but a final tip in that category is like carry a pen and paper. And if you're really stuck, ask people to write it down.
Yeah.
Because then when you see it, it'll probably be clear because of their accent or that they won't slow down. Like that can help a lot. Always have a pen and paper with you and never hesitate to say, oh, like after the third time, I'm sorry, I really don't get it. Could you write it down so I can learn it later? Mm-hmm. This is a good way to not make them feel like, oh, you're not speaking well. I can't understand you. Like say, oh, I don't know that word. Please write it down for me. But actually, the same goes in reverse. Also, is there are times when the native speaker won't understand you, and this can be very awkward. Also, because again, if you're a really good student in English in your home country and you come to a place where suddenly people can't understand you because of your accent, or it might be someone specifically who struggles to understand you. Well, following on that same tip, like you can take out your paper and write down the word because you know they know the word, and maybe it's just difficult for you to, or you're saying it incorrectly or a way they don't understand. As a broader point, though, a mistake that I used to make a lot was thinking that, oh, if I want to sound confident and sound like I really know the language, I should speak quickly because native speakers speak quickly. And that's disaster. Like that doesn't help anyone because then you're going to mumble, you're going to make more mistakes, your accent is going to be stronger. And again, don't try to sound fluent if you're not fluent. There's nothing wrong with slowing down and really focusing on each word individually. And that's something you can ask other people to do when they're speaking to you, but it goes both ways. Even when you're speaking to them, you will have an accent. I mean, and in Canada, 75% of the people have some kind of accent in English. Even if they are native speakers, they might be coming from somewhere else. So the more that we can really like try to speak clearly, think of each word individually, this will really help. Don't rush through it. Like that doesn't help. So I think that's a really good thing to remember and to speak. Like even me as a native speaker in English, I annoy my family sometimes because I speak the way that I want people to speak to me in a foreign language of let me hear each word individually. And sometimes in the US, I get people asking me like, oh, where are you from? Because I don't have an accent and I'm speaking too clearly.
Right.
But you know what I never hear? Like, I never hear, I didn't understand that. Could you repeat it?
Right. So it almost sounds like, kind of to summarize, like, what we've been talking about, you know, like, maybe putting down, like, your ego a little bit about your comfortability in the situation and, you know, putting yourself out there. It's okay to make mistakes. And then also just, like, not being above using every tool that you can. Right.
Absolutely. I think that's a perfect point and a perfect way to sum up is a lot of it is about humility. And whether you knew it or not, when you came to a foreign country, living in a foreign country is about accepting to look like an idiot on a daily basis. And the key with that is accepting that you will look like an idiot. There's no avoiding it. But if you avoid it, you will never engage, you'll never practice, you'll never improve. But at the same time, you have to embrace that while not thinking of yourself as an idiot. Mm-hmm. This is the balance, knowing that sometimes you won't look as fluent or as intelligent as you are in your own language. Mm-hmm. But remember, at the same time, you are the one making an effort in their language. Yep. So you don't have to tell them that. But in the back of your mind, if anyone ever makes you feel uncomfortable or like below them because you can't communicate as clearly as you would like, remember, you're the one making the effort to speak their language. Mm-hmm. And I think those 2 points really have to be in balance of being ready to look really foolish, but knowing that that's not who you are and you're doing this because you're being adventurous and brave.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much. Is there any like last tips you want to share? I mean, you shared so many amazing points.
I mean, all of this should be about improving the language. The language barrier is real. These are all kind of tips and tricks for getting over that in the moment, but take every moment, every experience, every embarrassment as a learning experience, like as much as you can. And you won't always be able to because it's exhausting, but if there's a word you didn't know, ask them to write it down and study it later.
Yeah.
If you like completely embarrassed yourself at the post office or something, then go home and try to figure out what phrase you did need to get through that situation and learn it so it doesn't happen the next time. The final thing I would say also is don't get stuck in your own language group.
Yes, this is huge.
This is really huge. And of course, I mean, this is something that a lot of people say, but the temptation to just hang out with people who speak your language is going to be constant and extremely strong. Now, compared to what a lot of like college counselors say, don't completely reject people who speak your language. That's a mistake also. Any extreme is a mistake. Like, it's about finding a balance. It's okay sometimes when you're exhausted and you want friends that come from your own country and speak your own language. There is nothing wrong with that. But if you find that you're not improving in English at all, and it's because you never push yourself out of your comfort zone, that's a problem. So It's all like training to run a marathon, really. I've used this metaphor in other places. You know, every day you should push yourself a little bit more, not to the point that you get injured or beyond your limitations. It's about that balance of always getting a little bit better, pushing yourself a little bit farther out of your comfort zone, learning your own limits, but knowing that there's a goal in sight and you have to keep being outside of your comfort zone to achieve it. So that's about language, about culture, about anything you learn. But that's something to bear in mind. No one said this would be an easy experience, and hopefully none of you came to Canada for an easy experience. So
no, because
it's all part of the experience.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thanks so much for giving some tips to our viewers.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Please go check out Caleb's Instagram and his Twitter, which is just How to Go Abroad. He posts a lot about where he travels. I've seen that you've given tips. You share really interesting blog posts. So yeah, that's probably the best way they can reach you?
That's right. Yeah, especially on Twitter. Trying to be more active with some of my pictures on Instagram, but most of my kind of quick tips or thoughts go on to Twitter.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Caleb. And
thank you.
We'll probably see you soon.